Buenos días, buenos días, buenos días. Empezamos el mes. Vamos a hacer la oración. El día miércoles. 1 de abril iniciamos el mes. Dios te invita a mirar más alto. Génesis 15:5. Mira ahora los cielos y cuenta las estrellas. Dios no respondió con lógica, respondió con visión. Cuando miras solo tu realidad ves límites. Cuando miras donde Dios te lleva ves posibilidades. Este nuevo mes levanta la mirada. Padre Celestial, ayúdame a ver más allá de mis límites. Bendice a cada persona que vea este contenido con una visión renovada para este nuevo mes. En el nombre de Cristo Jesús. Amén. Feliz mes, inicio de mes para todos. Que se cumplan todas sus metas, sus cuentas, sus deseos. Así que vámonos a trabajar. Estoy todavía con llanta baja porque sí me cogió la malaria. Presión. Cara Murphy.
This is going to be a short-term excursion. Trust Bloomberg for on-the-ground coverage. Are not de-intensifying. A lot of fear here Ukraine is being left out in the cold. The minute reporting, January 4th has been agents at the U.S. Embassy. The analysis you need. The United States military has shown its might. So it's time to please call out. Nobody covers geopolitics like Bloomberg. Fixed income fixed. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Century economy. Transactions snapped up nearly $1 billion in Bitcoin. Technology, digital turnovers, gives people financial freedom, and that's a wonderful thing. The U.S. technology. Biggest tech news and innovation. And his address to the nation at 9 p.m. tonight. Reuters reporting that President Trump will express his criticism of NATO tonight, that he says that the U.S. will be out of Iran pretty quickly, but that they can come back for
Very quickly.
It's over. Futures still rallying after that monster rally yesterday. We're up about 1%. NASDAQ was up 0.7%, as 10-year yields sold higher at 4.32. Energy and commodities.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to look at. So oil has been fluctuating. NYMEX crude has been fluctuating up and down around the $100 mark. Right now, we're at $100.16. Brent crude about $1.50 away at 101.86. Gold is rising today, and Bitcoin holding steady around $68,400 right now. So
A Bitcoin también están subiendo.
seen a lot of volatility, but it's interesting to see that oil, even with the market anticipating in some senses a retreat from the Middle East, is not selling well.
Because a retreat doesn't necessarily mean a straightforward would be open question marks to that this morning about if that's necessary for President Trump. Earlier in the week, he could leave without real there was that Wall Street Journal report, but today saying Jesus along once. The straightforward would need to be open without the oil still falling this morning as futures went higher would have just on the other side.
A ver qué tenemos hoy. Estamos a 3 minutos, pero me faltó el análisis de estuvo chévere. Respetando esa zona. Si esto vuelve a bajar, si vuelve a retroceder, una entrada sería acá. 5 minutos, pero 8:40, 8:45 se ve. El VIX tiene más ganas de subir que de bajar. Su madre. Tantas cosas que me salen. Quiero bloquear esas propagandas. Oye, es la esposa del Bill Gates, ex. Que nos depara el día de hoy. El oro tampoco no lo he visto. Ya nada. ¿No?
We're going to start trading on this Wednesday. This is Bloomberg Open Interest. I'm Matt Miller. We're seeing gains in futures, 0.5% on the S&P.
Está subiendo el S&P.
And yesterday's trade, the biggest we've seen since May of last year, was right after Liberation Day month. So I guess for the similar reasons, right? So Liberation Day and President Trump threatened the world with massive tariffs. The economy would have been greatly damaged. Then he brought them down. So we're like, okay, the economy can fly free now, soar like a pigeon in the sky. Wait, Paloma acquisition for bringing up NASDAQ. Paloma means pigeon. Is it yes, I know. It's probably because they thought it's still done. So has a daughter named Paloma. In any case, my point is, we were worried about war. March was a horrible month for stocks. And so more was destroyed in the stock market in March than any other month in history. And so yesterday, when the market gets the idea that maybe President Trump is ready to back out of the Middle East, the closed straits of Hormuz be banned. That market, although we know that there was a lot of short covering as well, pension funds coming in.
Eso quiere bajar.
Gamma particular dealers have rolled off that.
Sube Rusia.
It's Israel's.
See how it turns out.
Cerrar todas estas posiciones.
To build a plant and a data center in Ireland. In 11% for just 50% of that data center. Thank you very much. So by the rest of that, not over the 2 years. That's it. I don't know.
Say that's my stock. He expects revenue for the fourth quarter to be down 2 to 4%. Company
Nike está bajando otra vez.
taking longer than originally planned. The CEO said the direction is clear.
Parece que si quiere romper.
Here as well.
El bid está acompañado. Voy a quedar aquí 8.33.
Missed things estimates as tariffs, it says back literally on hardware down 40 or 20%.
Markets that are rebounding again after the rebound yesterday. Yesterday, Chief Investment Officer Tara Murphy says for more. It was. Yesterday is how it tapped it all off. Their portfolio right now. And a huge rally on our hands yesterday. Did you lean into the summer? Did you buy? Did you pick up some of the babies with the bathwater? Where do you stand now? To think about these conflicts as they tend to be relatively short-lived. It's very painful, and at least it looks like people who are directly impacted by it. At the same time, when we look back through history, these types of geopolitical conflicts tend to be short.
I mean, that's not more because actually, I take like Vietnam, Afghanistan, the thing of that time.
The market's focus tends to be quite short. And the U.S. economy is very, very rich, and that we are insulated from these types of conflicts. Now, the high oil prices are the way that these conflicts tend to transmit to the U.S. economy. But again, we're much more insulated than the rest of the world. So what happens is that as the headlines start to recede,
Estamos esperando PMI manufacturero. 11 minutos.
shift away from the massive names that have been so important for
Es
us.
que está ahí.
Beginning to show earnings power.
So the Mag 7, the tough start to the year, right? The whole market obviously did, but the Mag 7 index is down 11, 12% to buy that. You say, okay, this drop was amplified by the war, now we can through that. It's a cheaper set of stocks to buy.
I suspect what happens, like if you look at the Mag 7, actually, they actually peaked at the end of October. So that underperformance has been going on for a number of months. As the conflict hopefully comes to a resolution in the not too distant future, initially it's those Mag 7 things that are going to bounce back. Those are where valuations have come down. Earnings estimates have really held in there. So that's an easy place to go for some grounding. But as we kind of get past that, then everything in the back of the year, you start to see smaller, large caps, mid caps, small caps start to kind of come into their own when it comes to earnings, and that's the longer term trend that we see going forward. The concept ends, but the strait remains closed, and oil prices remain elevated. What's the impact of that happening? It's the base case right now. We don't go back to $60 oil. If we get back to, let's say, $80 oil, where the cost of doing business, the cost of transportation for oil is still high, it's still a very sustainable level. It's also at the level at which most American producers can be very confident.
Me gusta ese movimiento que hizo.
The broadening out that we are seeing, you bet on that because earnings expectations are still pretty high.
Son mucho ese movimiento que hizo.
Fantastic. And so even if we see a little bit taken off, we better rate expectations come down a little. So the valuations may rate down, and so that becomes a really big opportunity. We're going to have solid earnings power, and a little bit more attractive valuations. The earnings power, though, stay if consumers still able to afford all to the top again. Level, which the really strong consumer retail spending we got in February numbers are very strong, even though they were very backwards looking. People start to funnel more of their savings into things like the cost of powering their car. They start to save more. They get nervous. It's not the threshold. Sure, yes. And it's actually duration is more important than level. So the longer we stay at these high levels, the more damage that happens. The thing to remember is that this is really impact the lower end.
Está también hablando Barrent.
Smaller contributor overall to the US economy. Consumers are actually in really good shape. Wealth is at historic lows. Leverage is at historic lows. The amount of earnings that they spend on some of their gas savings is really small. So again, as we think about the US economy and how to get it's very asymmetric. It gets hurt by high oil prices.
So last year, the other markets around the world is Europe. Or the US. Now, they needed to do some catch up after a decade of underperforming, but is that trend finished now?
So it has totally been halted. If you look at emerging markets in particular, they've really been hit hard by these high oil prices. So you have to get that corrected in order to see some fundamentals with the states. But then if we think about the fundamentals, we think it makes sense to have exposure outside of the US. So you because we're likely to see a continued push on the dollar. Extraordinarily low valuations in those markets, and we're starting to see earnings go to higher. The dollar going forward. We're seeing the dollar decline now as we look towards resolution. Or how they're strengthening, how the war coming up, how we factor that into your Yeah, and the meanwhile, the dollar was quite weak. And so what we tend to see is that the US dollar goes through these large cycles. And it appears when the US dollar is appreciating, the US markets also tend to do better on a local currency basis. We think that we're starting to come off a very long period where US dollar has been strong, US assets have been descendant. And it's starting to favor some of those assets outside of the US. It doesn't mean the dollar is going to plummet, but on the longer, you think that outside the US, you're going to have that. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to see you. That's the Chief Investment Officer, Kara Murphy. And we're 8 minutes to go into your trading day right now. We are increasing that. We're now
8:45 vamos a entrar ahora.
Yesterday, for so far year to date, that's about that's advancing. They are now below 25%.
Él está bien.
This morning, Intel, we talked about the Intel that follow those shares. 6%. On the downside, consumer energy and following the price of oil. Medicaid down to 15% after a lackluster earnings report, which is not performed as expected. McDonald's is that MasterCard against some consumer exposed names like PNG.
Si nos llega a romper,
Alongside
Esto.
Biggest ones, accessible food, services, and tech clients, those info tech, those are
Brian Luder of Premier join us to discuss special starting at noon. Danny enters that. We have a lot to talk about. Brian, looking forward to joining us on this Bloomberg.
Las rentas de retail de febrero aumentan 0,6 versus 0,5. ADP, el informe de empleos en el sector privado de marzo indica contratación de 62,000 frente a 66,000 puestos en febrero. El consenso era de 40,000, entonces sí está aumentando.
We're tracking breaking news tonight on Wall Street to Washington. Of course, now we're gonna have a big week coming up in politics.
Season's underway. We're going to get some key reports.
Thing you need to know before the markets open on Monday. Introducing Bloomberg this weekend, bringing a little Bloomberg into your weekend routine. News whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Jemima Secchi in Davos, Switzerland, and this is Mother. And Africa. Vibrant resources and high yield investment.
2 minutos.
In Africa with newsmakers and insights on this exciting region. Now,
The market value was really big. The source of profit is like that.
Siempre hace eso ahí. Saca los stops, como a mí.
On over. And the early trade, we're up % on the S&P 500 after a massive
Y ahí sube.
61 is where we sit on the benchmark index. The NASDAQ up another 152 points to 23,895. It's getting back close to 24,000. You got the small caps driving more than 1%. It's time now for top calls. Some of the analysts actually focused this morning. First up is Raymond James, upgrading Walt Disney, saying the current slowdown and weaker international traffic make this a good sign.
Minuto.
Profits expected to drive more growth over the next few years. Next up is benchmark starting Microsoft with a buy rating saying the company is becoming a leading force in AI and says investors should take advantage of the recent pullback. Microsoft
3.3.
yesterday 25%. Worth it rallied with the rest of the market. HSBC is upgrading Bank of America and Wells Fargo to buy, showing that some bank stocks have overcorrected in response to rising economic uncertainty.
strong start to the year. Also talk about as we have the long continuation of how the global economic outlook. These growth is George Lawson and they founded private equity firm HGGC alongside policy or income about seeing the market.
We all like to feel these profound implications of this geopolitical strife, but there are certain pockets of the alternatives, and particularly medium-sized companies globally that are being transacted. We've actually bought a business in Canada. We've taken a business in buying in the UK. And we've also funded lots of ratings in time, so deals are still happening.
Sound page 6 is funded with their CEO, financing partner. Maybe you are nearly assets under management, you're one thing, but you operate truly globally. I mean, you're also investing in this AI, supply chains, war. Environment so far this year, I'd like to invest in.
Incredibly volatile. Volatility tends to create like really interesting.
Voy a romper esta zona. Miren, par, rechazo, par, rechazo.
So all three you can see, not all the you can see in asset pricing. Today is kind of reversed, and you see risk being priced everywhere, especially around AI trade. So it's a really interesting time. You were saying before, it's good time to sell this headline complex. Like the market, you're kind of generally not excited to invest in, but you have to pick really interesting selective assets that you can drive returns over several years. AI guess, evolution has created kind of a reckoning for software especially. And it turns out that either asset loaders are much more exposed to the computer.
Yeah, but a significant part of our NAV that's in B2B software, especially if it's a minority. You actually have a significant.
La voy a romper a la baja. Va a venir esta zona.
Sales software that you acquire. Recently, really towards the end of 2025, your software moved into a very close same price range. Oversold, not necessarily in total, but really usually single name, single software. Still oversold. I tell everybody, I'm saying bring something else to the space. The better look is good more is what they like. So, looking to find what's in that. The best and the market has to look at that. Markets have not yet sort of like those levels. It usually takes 6 to 9 months. That's a pretty good that this private markets has seen public market reality. There's some really stable buses out there, and it will kind of feel its way through the presentation. I guess must be so happy about when all the violence was happening. You look at the market, it kind of has a product. You having conversations with other market is a very consistent source of deal flow for us. It's a really good one. Any public company that's so we've taken kind of public and taken more companies public than we've taken public. Said that's being one of them. Sold some other public companies and sold it out the last year. Salesforce is a great trade for Salesforce. We're very happy with that company's not public right now. So yeah, it's a really interesting time to have that one. Maybe what do you want to do in a software company? He's without that's right. Yeah. There's a lot of overuse comfort terms that you see around software tests.
Petróleo está bajando. Eso sí está bajando. Nasdaq sí está bajando.
So there's a lot of folks that have changed, and a lot of those that we find really undivided today are back as basis. It's regulatory protection. It's relative market share and relative competitors. But actually, a lot of what we've been doing our existing portfolio companies going back to 2022, 23, really sometimes you can see what's aggressive investment.
8.50.
Real AI in our portfolio is growing more than 100% a year. So your best protection is actually really fast around technology more than 100% per year. That's more than every year. That's wow. Sometimes demand is AI interrupts. If you have access to context and workflow, it's the rate that it is done for enterprise is real value out of all data. So it worked for send us people on 200 million plus of that, 600 million is send us below. We've made that very successfully over the past 30 years. Really there is some people are saying is the bifurcation. Saying that the quarter fifty funds at a very significant definition have failed to earn the return, which earns the fees. So I talked about this on the because of how much was paid. Again, that sort of shakeout, that bifurcation, have those troubles fully made their way in the system? It never fully works its way entirely on the system, but it's a very consistent trend, especially institutional investors. And there needs to be so that's another consistent there is a cycle to the industry. Some that's driven by offense and interferes with life. We're talking about some very is that making its way out that vintage right now, or exits finally coming? Because I know there was some kind of indigestion as putting the sellers and the buyers could not come together. Is it coming together? It's it's still a low liquidity vintage across the class. Even if monetizing the art vintage for that, like that underlying portfolio is actually growing really nicely. So the more you grow work out some of the prices that were paid during the trade environment. So what we think actually the assets you want going forward, but our position is because we're a digital native investor across everything we do our secondary offices, so valid, deep kind of goes in valid, but applying that technology expertise to all of the areas we invest, whether it's services, healthcare, consumer. I think that's actually the side we want as a firm, and we need something that's that data.
But it's awesome to have you here. As Danny points out, your perspective is really valuable. So I think we can give you back on again. Brian, you're there talking to us. From here up, but fortunately here at 7:31 next. We're getting some breaking news from the Islamic Republic of Iran abroad. IRIB, citing IRGC, saying that the Strait of Hormuz won't reopen based on Trump's absurd displays. And that's their word, not mine. As a result, you can see that we have paired some of the gains that we had on the S&P, although we're still up 9% at 37 points and 65.65. So it is a headline worth paying attention to. We've seen a couple of these big red sticky headlines cross the Bloomberg terminal. Just about an hour and a half ago, President Trump said he will only consider a ceasefire with Iran when the strait is reopened. So the president officially making that an objective. Yesterday the Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said it was not an objective. Now Iran says they won't reopen the strait. So we'll continue to see it against volatility in these markets or on Bloomberg bids.
Se quedó como allá.
To the minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. And I'll listen to highlights. This is Bloomberg.
The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with the close. Weekdays on Bloomberg. Comcast changes everything.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI and entertainment.
The stars. You see the latest stories of the people and companies in the tech sector. Many times they're in politics.
In San Francisco, television.
Bringing you up to them in the news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Sherrian in Seoul. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg makers on that note, quick check on what stocks are doing after headlines crossed this time for Iran. We had President Trump earlier saying that he won't consider a ceasefire until the Strait of Hormuz is reopened. Remember, he said at the beginning of March, only when there's an unconditional surrender. But the Iranians say they're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz. As a result, we have some fluctuations, but still, 65, 64, 65, 66 right now. We're still up 0.6%. So the market really looking through those Iranian headlines. The NASDAQ gained 0.75%, a little more, almost 24,000. Take a look at crude. It's down 2.5%. This is WTI 98.77. Brent also down almost 3% at 101. So the market not buying what Iran has to say. Nvidia is up, and that's helping gains as well. Coming up the next hour, State Street's Maria Waitman shares her take on this week's asset graph.
Most powerful investors don't ring a bell, but quietly reshape entire industries. They seize the money shaping the world. The dealmaker playbook will power billions of dollars change hands every day. Private equity and credit, venture capital and M&A, we bring you the inside scoop on the biggest deals and debates, plus exclusive conversations with finance's ultimate insiders. The biggest scoop on this, you've been reporting about activist investors coming up and trying to shake things up with the latest. We fear that there's going to be an activist at some point. The question was, who?
There is a emergence of technology and national security.
The United States is a big country. Big thing in the Northeast. That's an economy as big as the United Kingdom. This is a really interesting space to watch. Looks like more consolidation. As I said, it's Bloomberg deals at Bloomberg Invest. I want to talk the broader deal in M&A environment.
The moment is on. We'll see how long we're here. It's far too early to call. There is an underinvestment in what's going on in private markets because everyone's looking for additional AI cloud capacity, and it's very tough to build.
Everybody wants to get things going, and then here market is just one symptom of how it is an early indicator of what we're going to see in the market. It's going to start with food. We're sitting at some super companies with ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. There's renewed investor appetite for new names in the space. Excellent reporting. Daniel Berger, and this is Bloomberg Deals. Only on Bloomberg Television. Investors, top executives, with global innovators, join people in-depth conversations with them. Newsmakers on the day's top stories. With like no one else. I hear only on Bloomberg.
So that's Supreme Court. This is appearance goes against the long-standing precedent that is not attending war on this.
In fact, I recall Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, criticizing Jay Powell for attending the Supreme Court argument concerning the Republicans report, saying that he was politicizing the decision. It feels like this is very much a political decision too.
Again, the President talked about the Supreme Court as justice, considered like constitutionality of its bill. Citizenship, which has been something we've had for a very long time.
Absolutely.
And what I understand from the legal experts is this: it's a pretty well established.
There's a law that was passed in 1952, basically mirroring the language in the 14th Amendment that all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof citizens. There's a key precedent in 1898, and the Supreme Court ruled that Wang Ken Park, he was born in the U.S. to non-citizen parents from China, was a U.S. citizen. And by the way, worth mentioning as well that this executive order that President Trump signed back in January 2025 has never gone into effect. It was blocked by lower courts, and reportedly would only affect big in the future, but once this gets reversed, who knows what could happen next.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is no video. There will be audio, and we'll take some of the oral argument audio live when it starts. And that's how the wording covered. That's how it's moved on here. So there's some service that we President that we really has en route to Supreme Court and then live Supreme Court. I would end upon with live report just moments ago. There's certainly protests on both sides of the issue happening at the Supreme Court.
Well, it's got a lot of people worked up, a lot of people animated. I mean, we're also reminding everyone that the opening arguments begin today. Let's put Jeff Mason, who's a former White House and Washington correspondent, joining us from our Washington bureau. Jeff, when it comes to today's arguments, I mean, this is the beginning of a long process. We're not looking for any kind of decision time soon, are we?
No, like you're surprised to say that it's the beginning of a long process, at least in terms of being a long legal process. This process started when President Trump signed that executive order on his first day in office of the second term. And it really laid out one of his and some of his advisors, I would note Stephen Miller being certainly high among them, a dream for conservatives and for MAGA faithful to get rid of birthright citizenship. So that's what he wanted. He got challenged in court. It has not gone into effect, and now he's going to sit and is sitting in the courtroom looking at three of the justices who were appointed and confirmed under his first term, listening for oral arguments.
Jeff, the fact that President Trump is taking a little step and actually going for sitting into oral arguments, that suggests that this is a very, very important topic for one again. Just frame that out for us, not something that I guess. How long has this been?
Well, it's you're absolutely right, and I think that number one, President Trump likes and he likes and has a flair for dramatic. This is a former reality television host who became president twice. And he still thinks very much like a reality television host. That's one reason why the press pool is often brought in to the Oval Office and to other events where he engages with the press. He's doing that in quote right now, sans camera. Which my guess is he was very happy to put it in the camera in the court today to see that. But to your broader question, yes, it's a huge priority for him because it's tied to one of his main promises as a presidential candidate, and that was to reform the immigration system in the United States and particularly to crack down on illegal immigration. And his view and their view in the administration is that birthright citizenship encourages people to cross the border and have babies. And that's what they want to stop. Now, of course, how they do that, and I guess that a little bit in the introduction, is that there are decades of legal precedents for this, more than decades, and that it is enshrined in the Constitution that being born in the United States needs to become a citizen. So that's what they're up against, the administration, and we'll have to see how the justices view it.
And of course, how the justices view it, I mean, are they likely, if they disagree with the White House's argument, what are their options? Because my understanding is the justices generally prefer to avoid major constitutional questions if they can decide a case based on existing law, statute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Supreme Court expert, but it seems it's hard for me to imagine how they can avoid constitutionality. I think that's part of the whether this is in any way in line with the Constitution would not be here as the war. Are pretty clear. Their interpretation is just totally different. To give the justice anything they want. I think they would be very interesting. Well, arguments to give the questions. And that is, for any really close to good watcher, that's the really dramatic part, is to get a sense of who's asking what and why, and then who the team is based on that.
Let's listen in, because the arguments have begun and General Sauer speaking. Let's listen in.
Use the term consolidated foreign authority in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It rejected a British conception of allegiance. Senator Trump will explain that subject to the jurisdiction of every state, not only reaches their lives. In 1884, this court recognized that subject to the jurisdiction means owned in immediate regions. This does not extend citizenship to the children of temporary visa holders or legal immigrants. Freed slaves, those visitors by to immediate allegiance to the United States. It's lawful domicile is the status that brings the right of allegiance, and the text of the laws supposes domicile. Decades following the law's adoption, commentators recognized that the children of temporary visitors were not citizens. They were legal aliens rather than legal residents to establish domicile. Restricted birthright citizenship contraries the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It means the price-specific gift of American citizenship. This is a powerful pull factor for legal immigration. So the immigration laws also States for decades. Generation of American citizens of all States. Citizenship. Citizenship clause refers not just to national citizenship, also to state citizenship. Are we to have two different definitions for those? One for citizens of the United States and citizens of the United States. Like, saying or really state citizenship is based on. Thank you, Justice Thomas. Start by addressing trans as you alluded to, trans you know, was one of the worst injustices in the history of this whole world. Citizenship clause is the citizenship reference that makes the law with rational discussion. So the citizenship clause, what you see is understanding that slaves are
Mira el Pix. Me gusta inventa, la verdad.
States and the states in which they reside. Citizenship. Section 1473 Justice Holmes jurisdiction. Since the United States and the state in which they reside, takes the clause itself supposes that the citizen is domiciled in the United States. They reside outside of the Constitution.
Me gusta inventa.
Starting with that theory, you obviously put a lot of weight on subject and jurisdiction. The examples you give to support that strike me as very quirky. You know, children of ambassadors, children of enemies during a hostile invasion, children on warships. Then you expand it to the whole class of illegal aliens that appear in the country. I'm not quite sure how you can get to that big group, such tiny and sort of idiosyncratic examples. There are those sort of, exceptions for minister of foreign ships, Chinese, that's why they are focused on things as well. Of course, look at the Unions, which is the amendment of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And there it didn't say subject jurisdiction era. It says not subject to any foreign power. If you go back to the Stone in this case, that's that it does not mean subject to any foreign power. This feasible to the allegiance to the king. Anytime, so there's a clear repudiation. Civil rights and civil rights have been Supreme Court. Just in terms of migration, it's up to conception of allegiance. So it's from any just conception dissatisfied with eventual ambiguity
It's not just in the entire jurisdiction. So it seems that that's is Senator Trump was saying that it was actually what that is jurisdiction has that it's not just jurisdiction.
This is your general town style arguing or the U.S. Supreme Court or following the president's office. Basically, I don't think that's at the Supreme Court oral arguments here and all the different background, senators' arguments. Yeah, we want to do an round table to kind of put this into context here. Jeff Mason, Bloomberg White House, Washington correspondent. Andrew Rasso, legal analyst here. Juno, we'll start with you. Just on the late ballot this year, just give us a history of how this case progressed through the courts and stuff that you supposed
Multiple reports who heard this issue ruled against the government, and some of them were very sharp tones because this has been an accepted part of American law since the end of the 1800s. So this interpretation that the Trump administration and the Solicitor General are trying to put on this, they're trying to look at the text, the history around it, because this is an originalist form. So it was that look at the text and what did the text mean at that time. So now for up until a few years ago, the text meant the same thing to everyone, but now because of this Trump executive order, we have all these analysts, legal analysts talking about how it is possible that it could be the way the Trump administration wants it. So this is new research that's coming out. So in the last couple of years, it's not when it's being held for, time immemorial in this country. So what the Solicitor General is doing is the question is, what is it the subject of jurisdiction of? That's what the whole argument is about. What do those words mean? He said, well, here in this decision, you take it this way. And so we sort of kind of put a gloss on what was said at the time. It really is an uphill battle. It's surprising to me that we've even come to this point because years ago, I think we thought that this was a ridiculous assertion.
Jeff Mason is our White House and Washington correspondent, Aaron G. Seabury. I just wanted to kind of expand on what Paul had mentioned, which is that President Trump is attending this hearing at the Supreme Court. What's the symbolism of that? And do you think, what do we anticipate the President to get out of this appearance?
Can you hear me now? Can we try again?
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, great. I was just saying that I think he's sending a message with that appearance, very, very deliberately. And in part, he's getting that message is to the three members of the court that he is responsible for getting them their jobs. Of course, they had to be confirmed by the Senate, but he appointed them, and not all of them have ruled in his favor on some of the other issues that have been before the court. Although, let's be honest, they've ruled in his favor on most, but not on one that was particularly important to him with tariffs, and this is also especially important to him. So I think he's demonstrating that by being in the court. If you were to get into President Trump's head, you might think that it's an intimidation move. I'm not sure intimidation is going to work with Supreme Court justices. That is their nest there. That is their home. And they're looking for the legal rationale for the decision that they want to make. Probably not paying a great deal of attention to theatrics. But the message is very clear that he wants to get across.
So I think, he is, as you said, he's a reality show host. This is not reality TV in the Supreme Court. They don't like this kind of drama. One of the president has come and sat in the Supreme Court oral arguments. I mean,
No manches.
the United States government. How many times Assistant General's office is there? If he's trying to intimidate them, I think it might have the opposite effect. You're not going to intimidate him. Besides which, so far, I mean, how many names has he called his attendees? At least the two who didn't vote for him on the tariffs case. He's called them names, and now he's putting there and saying, I'm the president of the United States. It's just, I think, it's a position that is, there's no harm in good coming from the decision. Because it's not like it's sitting there
just give us a sense of how the timing of this may go. We have all arguments today.
So oral arguments today, and then the justices will conference on it, and then they'll make their decision, and there will be all kinds of briefs going back and forth because you've got to limit the dissents in this case. When the decision comes out is anyone's guess. They'll come out before the end of the term, but if you look at past terms, most of the big cases come out very close to the end of the term. It's not the last day. You know that because we've been here.
Last day of the term is in
It's usually the end of June, but they have gone into July. So, I mean, the question is, do they say that to the end? They deny that. They say, when it comes up, it comes up. It's kind of like it ends up.
No rompe ni arriba ni abajo. ¿Qué se estará esperando? No lo sé.
Is there going to be another couple of days? I mean, this is clearly a priority for the president because he's showing up there, but he's a lot of other things that he said take care of today. Addressed to the nation this evening.
Yeah, a lot of other things we need. But you know what? That doesn't stop them. This is the president thing with the middle is launching a war against Iran.
No hay nada. Hoy.
Ballroom on Sunday night, got that renderings of the ballroom on Air Force One when he was flying home to Florida. So he juggles, and this is just one of those things that he's juggling. If you want to take a second though, to pretend I'm the Supreme Court reporter and analyze a little bit of that, a little bit of the opening arguments that we heard, I thought it was really fascinating that Justice Thomas was the first one to jump in. This is a justice who, as you will be able to say much more authoritatively than I, went for decades without talking at all on the court, and has more recently started to weigh in a little bit more. And today, the symbolism of a African American justice asking about Dred Scott and looking for the legal basis for this argument that the administration is making. I think that's fascinating. To me, it process probably. Well, I'm not going to say more than that.
So, I need to push that. Great analysis, Jeff. But they
Yeah.
have been asking the first person to put. That's when Justice Thomas started talking during the COVID arguments, because he was, they were all home, their own on a boat. So now the chief gives the first question to Justice Thomas. So every argument you're going to see Justice Thomas ask the first question. And it's been happening since COVID.
Will all the justices ask questions during this?
Not necessarily, but what happens is at the very end, the chief goes through the list of all the justices and says, through seniority, Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Sotomayor, any questions? And that's to eliminate what used to be, which everyone talking, it still happens sometimes, everyone talking over each other, and Justice Alito used to call it a hot bench, because, they were jumping on each other, right? So this is a little more subdued.
All right, then can I just last thing on that? Then I withdraw my smart analysis about the first, but I do think it's important that you mentioned Dred Scott, and I think the symbolism there is really fascinating.
Point taken. Jeff Mason, our White House correspondent, Shirley Glass, our in-house legal analyst. Go back and listen to Justice Elena Kagan speaking right now.
You're using some of your sources to get to this concept.
Well, take it straight from the framers' mouths. So, for example, Senator JOLTS says, jurisdiction means? He means suiting the jurisdictions. What does that mean? He says it means not owing allegiance to anybody else. He is the principal framer of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Rosita Bigham, who's the framer of the 14th Amendment, is asked, what does it mean in the conventional law, page 1291? He says, within the jurisdiction of the United States of parents, not owing allegiance to any foreign sovereignty. And we've cited debates reflect. He referred to the election of George Bancroft, and it's one of probably 16. So there's at least 13. One of the 12 juries was cited. Pages 26 to 28 of our group. There's over a dozen sources that specifically address temporary sojourners in the after the amendment. Every single one of them says temporary sojourners fail jumper are not including for 2 decades.
If domicile still we look at how domicile was understood in 1868. Look at it as understood today. And it's,
1868, understanding I'm not aware of a strong difference between those. But
here's where I'm going with it. I'm just quoting with it for a moment. And laws against immigration, they were much more restrictive than they were in 1870. So somebody showed up here in 1868, established domicile. Fine without respect to anything, any immigration laws, there they were. So why would we even a further define wrong test? That might be illegal. Why much you want to rely on long-term markets?
there is a statement that says so long as they are permitted to be here. So long more keep in mind that by the time they decide not to marketplace will do that.
It's 1890, over 1860. Tell me is when I should go into the test for domicile. The stuff you have about unlawfully present, it's like all the ball sources you're going to.
First and second statements as well, and but this is this ordinance.
So it wouldn't be the INA that control whether people, so whatever the law was in 1868.
This is addressed by my exchange justice earlier, which is that it's a jurisdiction. Each is a size is right to
Continually restrict, lawfully be present, or and more. And say that be incorporated into it, even though you're telling us to apply to it from 1860.
the original meaning of domicile. So the question is there any argument that the flavors intended to preclude this from dictating who can and who cannot establish? So you can see any evidence of that, any rational evidence, or it's an choice that
It's not the final, obviously. It's the evidence you have to focus on. Is it the husband, is it the wife, or if they're on it's domicile?
in order it draws a distinction between the mother and eventually the mother's domicile. I think that would be
1868, that was so what's in the answer?
the 1868 sources talk about parental not more than trying to distinguish mother or father, but they say that domicile the child feels that it's
So how are we going to determine domicile? I mean, again, we would be using contemporary sources on what qualifies as domicile in a state, or do we look at 1868? And do we have to do this for every single person?
Again, I don't see a strong distinction between those because, of course, domicile is a concept has been pretty consistent over centuries, which is the presence with the intent to remain permanently valued. Domicile, you come to a new nation, you're saying, I mean, to say, become part of their political community, you become akin to a citizen. And that's reflected very strongly in the case I said.
Just to circle back to Justice Morgan's point, it's striking that in the debates, the child's citizenship focus of clauses on the child. You don't see domicile mentioned in debates. The absence is striking.
I think the 19th century sources would say a newborn child lacks the capacity to form a domicile, so they reputed the domicile of their parents. So I don't think they would have seen a distinction between children and parents. I pointed that the position of divorce is forced to look at the domicile of the parents as to look at the exceptions that may have sat on child is and so forth.
But in the debates over the 14th and Civil Rights Act, it's striking that these concepts aren't discussed in the
Domicile is discussed. It's one of many.
allegiance, jurisdiction,
Well, here's just a few examples. Page 1679, the Congressional Record, President Johnson vetoes the first version of the Civil Rights Act, where he says, I can't say this because what we said in the suggestion that you're a domicile, aliens and foreigners, even if not naturalizing the Holy Ghost or some state, let's say, this is no space in the 19th century understanding. It's reflected in themes, it's reflected in Pizarro in 1802 and 1817. It carries through the 19th century. This court is talking in 1892 and 1893 was dismissed the Chinese exclusion against the domicile. It's the key concept that creates allegiance. That's
General So he said in your reply brief that the children of slaves who were brought here unlawfully, in defiance of laws forbidding the slave trade, would in fact be citizens. And you can imagine that their parents were not only brought here in violation of United States law, were here against their will, and so maybe felt allegiance to the countries where they were from. And you say that the purpose of the 14th Amendment was to put all slaves on equal footing, newly freed slaves on equal footing, and so they would be citizens. That's not textual. So how do you get there? You say it in just a few sentences, so can you elaborate?
Sure, if you look at the, I think if you look at the 19th century sources, what you see is that even though they're entering the 19th century antebellum law, you never forget that presence is all of the they make you it's like the Mississippi statute, it's related to that that says slaves in Mississippi in defense of the tons. In Mississippi, it's either they get away, Mississippi's probably still live here. It's not a shame, in other words, for the owners of the 14th Amendment to say, oh, these people were not domiciled, therefore it goes the other way. Because actually, U.S. law, even if they were illegally slave trade, once they were there.
Well, their intent is to return as soon as they can, let's say. So they're here, they're resident, and maybe under your theory, and which says, well, lawfulness for a different purpose, but they're here, they're resident. Let's take your assumption that they're not here unlawfully. Let's say they don't have an intent to stay. They want to escape and go back the second they can. They don't say?
Under the 19th century law, and I think this is the flip side of that hypothetical we talked about earlier. Under the 19th century law, they were treated as domiciled in the United States or the statute. In the debates that English will talk about this specific case, but say, look, slaves who have been forced to come here, they here, it's domiciled people, and they don't use domiciled, they use allegiance and say, they don't have allegiance unless they've been forced to come here, they don't have allegiance anymore. To take, and therefore,
Does that apply to the children of illegally trafficked people today? Same reasoning apply?
it would turn on it's lawfully domiciled in the United States.
So if they're brought in illegally, but then they choose to remain and they want to remain and they're domiciled, you would say that their lawful presence is not dictated by whether they were brought here lawfully or not. And that's different from someone who, say, crosses the border unlawfully.
Yeah, I think it would turn on whether their presence is lawful. It's funny, in other words, obviously, many other to assist people like that. The question is, if they get word to somebody that says that person actually a citizen, turn basically original public maybe the employees. For this very process, you can't really announce.
Citizenship. Nice smart around. So we discuss this there basically where the White House Washington correspondent and cross over. Jeff, let's start with you here. I have to be honest, before this executive order, President Trump, I didn't even know this was really an issue. How does it hold with his base? It's one thing to shut the borders if you're characterizing all these people as being let out of prison, but this is something different. This is to his base.
Well, it's certainly it's a little different, but it's connected. And the broad issue, of course, for President Trump and for his base is to crack down on illegal immigration and to try to give a disincentive for people to cross over the borders into the United States without having done it in a legal way. Some of which we're hearing from John Sauer and the Supreme Court is that the U.S. law or the U.S. precedent, which is what he's fighting against right now, essentially encourages people to come into the U.S. and give birth to children and then receive that citizenship. You asked me about polling. I don't know the answer to that in terms of what the polling is specifically on the MAGA base and birthright citizenship, but my guess is it's also very popular because the president's broad immigration agenda is very popular with his base and is one of the primary reasons, among a few others, that came back to power.
Right, so we have been listening to the first 30 minutes of the opening arguments, and Drew Grasso, host of Bloomberg Law, and our legal analyst here at Bloomberg Radio. There was a lot of back and forth. Is that typical of the open rules of this kind of event? It is typical. It's very typical. And I think what you heard was a lot of pushback from justices on both sides of the dialectical spectrum. You heard Elena Kagan talking about how it's viewed, as we talked about before. That they have sort of been coming to for the last couple of years, and they've been reaching for obscure references to try to interpret the words subject to the jurisdiction of. Can you heard Justice Gorsuch talking about the ability to Roman Justice Barrett also talking about the position is very difficult, I think. Now, when you listen to the oral argument that hear one side, you think that side is, because the justices are asking all these questions. We have to wait to hear what questions they ask with the ACLU lawyer. Tell something oral argument. It's not so true, but sometimes true.
Important. Overturn something that's got decades of precedence. Is that something that takes extra effort on your part?
I think it will take extra effort in this case in particular, but I mean, they do, and they have overturned precedents from, a few 40 years ago. I mean, you're talking about union precedents from 40 years ago.
Yeah.
It can be done. They can do it. If they want to.
All right, Jeff Mason, thanks so much for joining us. Jeff Mason's Bloomberg White House and Washington correspondent, and June Grosso, Bloomberg Legal Analyst. Bloomberg Law airs at 6 p.m. Eastern this evening on Bloomberg Radio. Today, Supreme Court again, maybe even more so, or the week, I guess, by the President Trump having to war.
We've never seen that before, in fact, and of course, all the cameras were there to capture him walking into the Supreme Court, and they'll be there when he walks out. But there are no cameras inside the Supreme Court during the arguments. I guess for good reason, but I wonder if that's going to be the case because this is a president who thrives on kind of making a big show out of everything.
It seems like we're Anderson. Yeah, people expect to get video. So why did
True was reminding us that there wasn't an audio there once, so we tried to technology is starting to catch up here.
All right, in the markets here, we continue over on to the gains here. The S&P's up 44.6%, the Nasdaq's up 230 points. That's 1%. We've got oil down $2 a barrel for WTI and Brent. WTI is now $99.20 below that.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day. Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, the Bloomberg Business app, the Bloomberg Business Flash.
Broker Studio, I'm Alexis Christoforous, and this Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Eisner Amper. Most advisors tell you what happened. Eisner Amper tells you what to do about it. Assurance, tax, outsourcing, and advisory services built for businesses that can't afford to guess. EisnerAmper.com. Well, it looks like investors are in an optimistic mood after a rally that led stocks to their biggest one-day gain in 10 months on hopes the war with Iran will soon be over. S&P 500 up 46 points now. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 276 points, a gain of 0.6%. NASDAQ Composite up better than 1%, or 245 points. We have in the oil pits, Brent crude briefly slipped below $100 a barrel after President Trump said he expects the war in Iran to end in 2 to 3 weeks. Brent is now at 101.75 the barrel, down more than 2%. WTI crude also down about 2% at 99.35 the barrel. We've got the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index down about 0.4% at 1210.84. Spot gold up about 2% at 47.50 the ounce. In stock news, Nike down 14% to the lowest level in a decade. It's also the biggest loser in the S&P 500 after the company gave a gloomy outlook for the year ahead and said its turnaround is taking longer than expected. And shares of H, formerly Restoration Hardware, plunging nearly 23%, hitting its lowest intraday level in about 6 years. The upscale furniture company forecasting revenue that disappointed investors. Analysts say the forecast is pressured by execution and supply chain disruptions. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Scarlett.
Alexis, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Scarlett Still and Paul Speed. We're live right now in the Miracle in the studio, streaming live on YouTube. Headlines across the Bloomberg just top Gulf aluminum producer EGA halted smelter. Iran is right. You know, the aluminum money. Screen 70% here today, which is perfect. It's a GUI for Michael Weld, senior commodity strategist for Air Intelligence. Mike, talk to us about the aluminum market. I guess we all have to get smart on that today. What thoughts about it?
The key thing to think about aluminum market is about less than 10% of supply comes from the Middle East Gulf area. 60% is from China. So yes, this is a factor. It's an issue cutting out global supply. It's the fog of war. But in the macro big picture, it's actually more destructive in the big picture. It's going to post prices in the short term, which will curtail demand, bring on supply. But the key thing overall, big picture, is why is everything going up? Because of the hostility, crude oil spiking. But number one thing to remember about crude oil is typically its own worst enemy. We're seeing that now. It was in 2008, was in 2022. But the difference this time is global, it's spiking, and now it's triggering a global recession. More supply potentially, curtail demand, and major issue of consumer sentiment, capital budget decisions, which means a downward trend. The key thing to think about here is the potential wealth destruction.
Yeah, especially when it comes to oil. To go back to what Paul was saying about Emirates Global Aluminum, which is EGA, that is the region's top supplier, and it did say over the weekend that it sustained significant damage at its site in Abu Dhabi. You had mentioned that the Middle East only accounts for about 1/10 of global production. Why is the impact so amplified then? What do inventories look like that might account for the outsized reaction?
Well, before this came out, our BI strategist thought aluminum was becoming oversupplied, was more likely to head towards 24,400. Now we're near 3,500. They say, well, if this continues, it might head towards $4,000 a ton. So it's shifted the narrative. A lot of this, I think, is the risks of a continuing hostility from Iran. That's it. I think it's probably the fog of war, and it's oftentimes these are peak weeks. For instance, crude oil probably peaked around 120, and now it's starting to tick lower. Aluminum seeing its moment right now. Look what happened to copper. Copper put a new high early in the year. It was up 15%, and then it ended up dropping almost 20%. Same in silver, same in gold, same in natural gas. So that's kind of what's happening. Right now, it's the pumps carrying to things like aluminum and crude oil, but everything else has been shifting to dumps, partly because that's what happened. Go up too much, you shift back low. Particularly stock market.
Yeah, Mike, we've seen the stock market today and yesterday kind of bouncing back, trying to look through the kind of jump on President Trump's comments that this is shorter rather than longer issue here. Not so much the oil market. Oil market's hanging on to these higher for longer. Does that simply reflect that you haven't seen any concrete moves to open this way?
So here's a coffee bar. I think by the midterms, WTI crude oil is going to be closer to $40 a barrel, 40 than 100. And there's one justification for that. You have to skate to where the puck's going in crude oil. And that December contract, that December future right now is $70 to $71 a barrel. Got to their 80. It's going to be front month right before the elections. What does Mr. Trump mean? You can remember here, there's the demand versus supply in US and Canada for crude oil liquid fuels is so collapsed. It's now 8 million barrels a day. Crude oil in 2008 at 147 was a deficit. This spiking prices bringing on the sell forward like that December contract, bringing on more supply, which means profits and lower prices and things taken. The bottom line is consumers are being squeezed by the spike in distillates and gasoline and diesel. To me, this is very similar to 2008, but worse because then U.S. was a net importer. Now we're a net exporter. It's very much fair to the U.S., but it's not favorable to prices that we get for it.
Right. It's favorable for the US, it's favorable for WTI, which is the US benchmark. What does this picture mean for Brent, the global benchmark, and for all the oil importing nations out there in Europe, in Asia?
Local percent. There's you have it right now, Scarlett. So I have to ask because what's this doing for consumer sentiment? Capital budgeting decisions. Consumers in this country really want waiting well before this happens. I think it's a classic shut up. We saw in 2008 when they originally after that price of gas and got the rest of the world and this happened. Facing the tariffs from the U.S. and deflationary forces from all this exports and trying to go into the rest of the world. And the bottom line, I think, is this is all happening with the U.S. stock market. It's very complacent. The main thing I think is gold warned us. Gold spiked last year. To me, that was the warning. Now it's making more sense what's happening this year. It warned us we're going to get volatility. That's all trickling over to the stock market. Everything goes down eventually.
All right, and just a follow on to that headline about EGA halting its smelter after the Iran strike, we're seeing shares of Alcoa and Century Aluminum rise to session highs. So the U.S. aluminum producers are climbing on the news that the Emirates Global of Aluminum, the EGA company, has halted its smelter. Mike, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit about the president's address to the nation this evening at 9 p.m. What is the market bracing for any kind of commentary that could move oil prices dramatically? I mean, are you looking for in terms of positioning to determine whether that's the case?
I saw this morning there will be no ceasefire to the Straits opening. That was certainly close to Mr. Trump. It's part of the strategy. That's a key thing we have to be very careful of these pie in the sky expectations. And all these things coming out of they sell and they did. I think for this, he's going to try to sue the market. Like the advisor to the time, sorry, we have to clear up the strait. We have to close that. We have to clean it up, get out, make it clean before you get out. Otherwise, your legacy are ruined. And probably needs a global recession. And by the way, the number one issue is affordability. And right now, stock market going up, gasoline prices going, stock market going down, gasoline prices going up. It's really bad for consumer sentiment. By the time you get the midterms, you have to make sure you have a path to make that better.
You know, it's this time of year where we're no longer jealous of Mike McClellan. It's got 80 and sunny. We'll push 80 today here in New York. So, I mean, Mike, you can have it in our spring here. Mike McClellan,
Finally.
senior commodity strategist. Yeah, find it. He's a senior commodity strategist for intelligence. Is based down there in Miami, supporting it year round 10. But he is our go-to person on commodities. We'll get the portfolios. Here, look at that. Scroll it.
The market overall, because there's a lot of talk about how the spike in stock prices yesterday was due to a lot of short coverage.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't last. But we're seeing some follow through of buying here with the S&P 500 up 0.9%. There was a lot of short interest in the overall market. So yesterday's comments or reports that President Trump are looking for some kind of on-ramp caused a lot of people to probably put very good word for here. The first night is going to.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up. Because we have no idea. Everybody has any idea what the person will say at 9 o'clock. Since he tweets so often, we kind of know where he is. But we'll see how it goes. So again, stocks moving higher here. Look at that WPI function. And also gives me a sense of volume. Volumes are trading 15 to 30% above 30-day average. So people are buying today, they're buying size and actually a sense of their this is
Intelligence with Scarlet Food and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Morning, Bloomberg Intelligence and Paul Sweeney and Scarlet. And what are the stocks that we're keeping an eye on? Let's go through out of the markets. Value from yesterday. Is Nike. No rally there because shares of Nike down almost 14% after its latest earnings report. The last quarter was fine. It's the outlook that has people a little bit concerned. Ryder is our retail reporter and she joins us. Actually, is she great? She is. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought she was going to be here. That's why I couldn't do it. Great to speak with you. Specifically, that Nike said that got people concerned because of the condition to really understand that Nike is in turnaround mode, so it's not just straight line up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's still fair to say that what really spooked investors was they shared the outlook for revenue for the year. It's just much slower than should be expected. They're still having a challenge with Converse. They're now seeing some challenges in EMEA, and that's offset some of the gains in North America.
Talk to us about the inventories, because I thought that was a big issue for this company. Hey, let us just kind of get through meeting down our inventory and then we'll be in good shape. I thought they were making progress there, and I probably representing the market here because the market, I guess, was surprised here with respect to inventory.
Yeah, so one place that inventories came up this quarter that was interesting is they said that they're seeing some elevated inventories in EMEA, in Europe, in the Middle East, and they're also seeing some traffic disruption there from the war.
What is it specifically the China that's been an issue? Because inconvenience has on there, but it goes beyond that, and because a weakness in consumer spending and rising competition, but he has been really struggling to get its China business, its greater China business back to what it was.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say it's a lot of increased competition there. And this quarter they did show some improvement in China. I think things turned around a little bit more than was expected, but still not.
That's really been weak for Nike is Converse. I don't know if that weak, but I love Converse sneakers. Yeah, exactly. And Converse sales fell more than expected. I think you have something like a 15-year low in your stories. What is going on there? Because it has attracted some interest.
Yeah, so Converse has been one of the most stubborn parts of the business to turn around under Elliott Hill. So I think, Nike has really relied on Converse for the Chuck Taylor, but has struggled to diversify outside of that. So they're trying to make a basketball push, but, we're not seeing a lot of progress in that area. And, we reported yesterday that they, authentic brands have expressed some interest in Converse. So we'll see what happens there. Nike has said, they're still invested in Converse, but it hasn't turned around yet.
It's just for Nike overall, and I think of them, I think of them as just one of the great consumer product brands, which is their cutting edge, leading edge kind of products. Maybe they've lost that. I mean, how certain people that they just kind of lost the real for the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think innovation was definitely a concern prior to Elliott joining. So under John Donahue, one of the biggest concerns was there's a lack of innovation. They keep relying too much on some of their lifestyle products. So on the Dunks, the Air Jordan ones, Air Force ones. Elliott has really refocused the business around sport and he's been trying to innovate in that category, making had some new product come out around the Olympics. So I think that's an area to watch closely, seeing how much innovation they're able to come out.
And speaking of Elliott Hill, he's been on the job for now 1.5 years. Does he own everything that's happened, or does he still get a little bit of a pass? I mean, I imagine that it's frustrating for investors. It's frustrating for him as well to kind of see the stop and start progress.
Yeah, so I think that in one of our stories today, we said that shares are down more than 35% since he started, despite him executing a new strategy. He, on a call with employees, said he was so tired, talking about fixing the business. I think he's definitely it seems like he's starting to feel some of the frustration there, the business not turning around.
Lily, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. The buyers use a retail report for reviews. Here's the latest on Nike shares. Again, disappointing results from Nike. disappointing guidance. We've seen that in the stock here, stock trading down significantly. Again, this was probably, remember in the last quarter or two, so a lot of analysts were saying, all right, you're getting past this inventory issue and start focusing on growth again. And I think that's where a lot of the consensus was. So they've got this number today. They figured out to stop off 14% today. It's still a small cap company. It's $67 billion market cap. Setting 852 global today. Stock's down 28% year to date. So back to the woodshed. I think
they need time to like rethink the strategy, the one that they're putting in place, because as you mentioned, investors were looking for more. The consensus estimate was for 2% gains this quarter, and they gains for the rest of the year. And instead, Nike saying revenue will fall as much as 4% this quarter and will stay in low single digits for the rest of the year. It's not a growth story.
and just looking around at the gun posts, most of our sneakers.
Not wearing Nikes.
There weren't other brands that I'm not aware.
Holdings.
Those things like not even my generation. So to me, it's just Nike was it, and that's and they had 500 different things to choose from. So
On the super tigers.
really,
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people like exactly my demographic with the same secrets, and then you realize that's the tiger.
yep. Good, thank you. Thank you for that. For our listeners in the U.S. and Ohio, this is supposed to be a satellite radio on Sirius XM channel 121. Access to what's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Radio on Sirius XM channel 121 is presented by Gold, Present Metals. Stay tuned to the latest market news and industry research. The next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence starts.
Bloomberg Intelligence, Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
The Fed is looking at tariffs, the uncertainty of tariffs.
Let's take a look at the sectors and how they perform.
Lots of investors getting whipsawed every day by news events.
Breaking market headlines. Corporate news from across the globe.
We see a market disruption, a market event.
Just two big super
We see some so-called low-quality stocks driving this short-term rally.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, Originals, and the Bloomberg Business app.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence. We are broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Sphere in Midtown Manhattan. We are streaming live on YouTube and on Bloomberg.com/video. Paul Sweeney and Scarlett Fu here with you as we look at the stock market extending yesterday's rally, and oil prices at the moment are lower by 2%. So we're going to check in with, of course, everyone to talk about these markets, but we're also going to get an update on what's happening at the Supreme Court, where the president has shown up to hear the opening arguments on his effort to reverse birthright citizenship. Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent, will be giving us the latest there. We're going to check in with Ed Ludlow, our VTech co-host, who joins us from the Kennedy Space Center on NASA, launching astronauts to the moon for the first time in half a century. Sylvia Jablonski, CEO and CIO of Defiance ETFs, will discuss her outlook for these markets. And Lindsay Dutch, our consumer hardlines senior analyst, will recap earnings from RH Restoration Hardware, as well as talk about what's going on with Intel. But first, let's bring in Charlie Pellet for the Business Flash.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Lots of moving parts to this morning. We got you covered here at Bloomberg. Down the S&P NASDAQ, all pushing higher, building on yesterday's surge. S&P 500 index. So right now, best level of the day up 63, 65.91 where we stand on that index, up now by 1%. Stocks are climbing. Oil is sliding on war and optimism. Dow Industrials up 400, even up by about 9 cents of 1%. The sector positive index now up 314, up another 1.5%. The VIX now with a 3 handle, the 10-year 4.30%, the 2 years 8.78%. Gold up $95 the ounce, up 2%, 47.62 on the versus metal. West Texas Intermediate back below 100, 99.02 right now, down 5.3%. Brent gold benchmark 144 now, down by 2%. We are watching Nike shares sell on, down now by 13.8%. Nike down, and the retailer gave us US rising, moving out the year ahead now. So looking higher follows the company for Bloomberg News. Guess what to go right here on Bloomberg Intelligence.
Investor as well. They shared for revenues every year, and it's just much lower than the street expected. They're still having the challenges with Converse. They're now seeing some challenges in Economia, and that's offset some of the gains in North America.
Down 13.8%. Another interview right here on intelligence. We mentioned crude oil moving lower, but elsewhere in the aluminum industry, we are keeping an eye on a top producer that is halted its smelter after an Iran strike. Alcoa shares today, they're up by 5.7%, and other aluminum producer, Century Aluminum, CENX on the ticker, up now by 6.2%. Bottom line here, stocks are rallying again. West Texas Intermediate just about $99 a barrel. Starting all of that. So Bloomberg Business Flash.
That's sort of the film also we live here on the studio here. City, sunny.
Change.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's city.
I know. So we go away in the winter, you stay around in the spring.
Yeah.
So we can go over the summer.
A lot going on out there. As Charlie was just reporting, we got some green on the screen here. Let's take a look at some stocks on the week today. That was just need a keynote that thing.
All right, well, let's start with Intel today. Those shares are roaring at the moment. So ticker INTC. Shares extending now up 9.4% on the day. And that is because Intel agreed to pay $14 billion to buy back half of the plant. So be flying out with cash in hand, as well as the issuance of about $7 billion in new debt. Now, so you're thinking that this is a positive sign for Intel because they spent much in 2025 in cost cutting mode. And so the fact that they're spending money and invested in infrastructure, particularly as they try to get into the AI infrastructure space, that's all being taken positive.
Frank Gehry, I saw this chat.
Strategy here. Why have to plan? Is it that's what I would do. Defense contractors. Absolutely, Scarlett. In particular, because that's a big winner as well today. So ticker BA, those shares also climbing on the day. They are now let's have a look here, more than 5%. So extending some of those earlier gains. And that is because the Pentagon and NASA partnership with Boeing, as well as Lockheed Martin, to triple the production capacity of Seekers for the Patriot Advanced Capability 3 missile segment enhancement. That is a lot of words to say missiles, but there you go. And so Boeing now involved in this deal as well. And Pentagon also saying that it's going to be a 7-year agreement with Boeing. It's going to be part of its recent agreement with Lockheed to triple the output for these Patriot Seeker missiles. And so analysts are noting that the triple production is well in excess of, I think it was initially an implied 750 per year in 2030, which was earlier reference in 2012. So what shares what do you think of that spot? Let's take a look at Nike, big downer stock today. So ticker NKE, again, those shares extending their opening declines, and they are now at more than 14%. So Nike did have a similar forecast for the year. They said that revenue is expected to decline. The current quarter is going to be down for the rest of the calendar year. It's exclusive. So taking a look at this recruiting of staff meeting where the CEO, Elliot Hill, talking to staff, basically airing his frustration about the situation. He said, quote, I am so tired and I know you are too of talking about fixing the business. I want to move to inspiring and driving growth and having fun. The vibes are off. They're not having fun.
I can report. Who can report? Scarlett. You know, it's wearing bands.
So I don't know if that's going to help turn around their business, but you know, like you need more customers like you. Thank you so much. She is our managing editor here at MLive.Go for her markets blog. Be sure to check it out on the terminal and for conversations like what we just heard. Subscribe to our stockholders reports where we offer 5-minute audio reports on these winners and losers in the stock market. find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. So President Trump has a busy day today. I mean, he began this morning by going to the Supreme Court, where he is currently in attendance as the Supreme Court listens to opening arguments on the White House's bid to reverse birthright citizenship, to change what it means to be a citizen here in the United States. Let's begin Tyler Kendall. She's a Washington correspondent, and she's right outside the Supreme Court. Tyler, what can you tell us so far about the hearing?
About an hour into oral arguments here at the Supreme Court, and we're not expecting there to be a ruling today, but essentially what we're looking for are those signals, those clues that court watchers want to see that will give us an indication on how these justices may weigh in when it comes to this case in that specific. Now, we can say going into today, some conservative justices think have already signaled to us that they may be skeptical about some of the administration's arguments here, and we're starting to see that echoed as the Solicitor General John Sauer is taking questions from these justices as we speak. For example, Chief Justice John Roberts calling one of Sauer's arguments, quote, "Porque." He also said, take a listen to this quote, "It's a new world, but it's the same Constitution," because part of this is that the Trump administration is trying to argue that when we can back up. This is essentially about the citizenship clause under the 14th Amendment. And the Trump administration has tried to argue that the drafters weren't thinking about undocumented immigration at that time. Therefore, it shouldn't be applied as broadly. Collins Road did hear at least one justice appear to signal some sympathy to that argument, that was Samuel Alito. But at this point, we haven't heard yet quite from the challenger side. They're up next. The ACLU brought this class action lawsuit, and we'll hear from a third lawyer next. But until that happens, we can't really give a full picture on exactly how these justices are weighing it.
Tyler, just Scarlett mentioned the president certainly has a busy schedule today. At 9 p.m. Eastern time, he's scheduled to speak to the nation. Do you have any idea what the topic is, what he's going to say, why now?
Well, Paul, at this point, the White House has outlined that, of course, it's going to be about Iran, and we can take some clues from what the president has focused on over the last 24 hours, mainly taking aim at some of our NATO allies. Just yesterday, of course, posting that he is urging our NATO allies to open the Strait of Hormuz, go in and take the energy supplies themselves. Pair that with recent comments this morning in an interview with The Telegraph, saying that he is seriously reconsidering the U.S. being part of the NATO alliance. Pair that then with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, overnight saying that it's time to, quote, re-examine the alliance. I think it is probably safe to say that we could expect the president to pile on at that criticism and that pressure of our allies on this backdrop, as we know that the administration has been telegraphing at least that they think that this war could conclude in the next 2 or 3 weeks. In President Trump's own words, yet still we are getting so many headlines, including this morning, President Trump saying that the U.S. will not agree to a ceasefire unless the Strait of Hormuz is open. There's been no indication that Iran has offered that there could be an unconditional cease in the hostilities just yet. But that, of course, is raising questions here about exactly where these negotiations stand. Since Iran won't confirm that they're happening, but the U.S. says they are gaining strength.
And of course, on the U.S. side, the negotiators for America would be Jared Kushner, as well as the president's friend, Steve Witkoff. He's kind of an emissary overall. Do we know whether discussions are still taking place with whoever's representing Iran in Pakistan as its role as a mediator?
Right, so we've gotten some indications from the administration that these diplomatic talks are underway. Take Secretary Pete Hegseth just yesterday saying that these talks are, quote, gaining strength, but also maintaining that the U.S. will continue to strike Iran until that agreement is in place. At the same time, you also have President Trump saying that he doesn't necessarily need an agreement to be in place in order to end the U.S. military operation, and instead reiterated that the main goal here is that the U.S. wants to ensure that Iran will not be able to obtain a nuclear weapon with or without a finalized deal. So a lot of different threads that we could pull on. Scarlett, the administration maintains that they are talking with Iran, though a new statement out from the Iranian foreign minister earlier today, the Iranian state TV, saying that they are rejecting President Trump's assertion that these talks are happening or that the U.S. could have a say in what happens to the future of the Strait of Hormuz.
Tyler, I did tell him it's loud where you are, there's a lot going on where you are, it's better than what's this morning's crowd, shooting, I have to contend with them, including, I think, like marching bands, testers, right? Or testers, Tyler, just remind us what the timing is here, do we have arguments today, look, we're not gonna hear from the Supreme Court for a while already.
Not, they're willing to likely rule by July, the Supreme Court term ends in June. This is a highly anticipated case, and there's a lot at stake here for President Trump, considering that he has been under pressure when it comes to his hardline immigration policies. I can tell you why on the direct field U.S. capital that's under right now in background, of course, the Department of Homeland Security is still in a government shutdown over disagreements after the president's hardline policy tactics. And the fact that he is here today at the Supreme Court really shows that he's doubling down, and it's going to see here, as you mentioned, a lot of protesters also get seen inside the courtroom. Don't have like inside the building. He's sitting and just keep away from those justices who he has often criticized. We saw that landmark where I was there with you in New York when it happened, and they overturned his tariff policy. So a lot of drama today here in Washington.
A lot of drama, and as we were mentioning earlier, there is live audio feed of the arguments taking place in the Supreme Court. But it's the first time, well, no, I had said that had not happened before. Obviously, there used to be hundreds, but yes, thank you to Drew Foster for that. So, thank you so much, Tyler Kendall. We'll let you get back into the shade because I was inside the Supreme Court right now. She's on Bloomberg, Washington, correspondent. Switch gears and move over now to Florida, where Ludlow, our tech co-host, is standing by. He is at the Kennedy Space Center. And there's going to be a lot happening today, this evening, specifically with NASA astronauts poised to lift off on a 10-day journey. Tell us why this is so significant.
This is America through NASA trying to take humans to the moon for the first time in more than 50 years. In this instance, in Artemis 2, the name of the mission, there will be no attempt to land on the moon. But it's been since the Apollo era that America's even tried, right? So much of America's and the world's space activity has been focused on low Earth orbit. And it's part of this bigger goal of America establishing a presence, landing on the moon's surface as early as 2028. Within the background, the geopolitical context that China has similar ambitions, right? They've said 2030, so the race is on. And this Artemis 2 mission is a critical dress rehearsal, if you like, to test those key rocket and launch systems, as well as the Orion spacecraft developed by Lockheed Martin.
You know what? I'm old enough to remember we've already done this, been there, done that. I, for one, I think I speak for a lot of folks on that generation. We're like, hey, we've already done this. Can't you guys come up with something new? What's the bigger reason on the back end to go back to the moon?
Yeah, I mean, it is politics, right? You know, there is a camp of people that believe there is a future where we rely on access to the moon's surface, an established base for resources, literally in the context of minerals. There is the space industry perspective that if humankind and America has an ambition to get to Mars, the best way to do that is to launch eventually from the moon's surface or use the moon as an issue of resource. But beyond that, you know, the other way of looking at it is why have we not done this since the Apollo era? You know, I don't know, Paul, I'm not going to comment on your age, but you know, what Kennedy said famously in the early 60s is that they wanted to go to the moon not because it was easy, but because it was hard. But he made a second speech later in that year where he said, you know, the world was basically at a crossroads between capitalism and communism is what he was referring to. But, you know, that political part is a big point, and it has not been the focus of prior administrations to go to the moon. Trump has made it a priority.
Very good. And Ludlow, BTEC co-host, he's down there at the Kennedy Space Center, which is better than so many other places. Some of these lunches out of like in West Texas, actually.
Absolutely.
Being down there, I'm getting down there too. Right crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Billionaire Elon Musk's SpaceX has filed confidentially IPO here.
And this is one of the most anticipated IPOs ever. It's been something that people have been looking ahead to, looking forward to. We already know NASDAQ changed some of the rules for inclusion in the NASDAQ 100, so that a company like SpaceX can be added after 15 days as opposed to after a longer venture period. So investors can get access to this company sooner.
Yep, and the numbers are gonna be just. Yeah, controlling big type of things. So, again, we term Elon Musk, SpaceX has filed confidentially for the IPO beginning process. How about that? S&P of 64.
Día de hoy, su madre. Ya no rompió el auto. No voy a cerrar el gráfico, pero yo creo. Ahí está su mensaje. Por lo menos de estos 100 puntitos. VIX. Wow, bajó el VIX.
Metals.com/guide. Front to the headlines moments ago, SpaceX has filed confidentially for an IPO that supported the $1 billion matter.
Voy a cerrar este gap.
biggest ever listing sources of nothing has been submitted as ideal registrations for the SEC. Include see evaluation in the IPO of your 1.75
Ahí está, cumplió el objetivo, poquito a poquito, pero se fue.
Now, the S&P Nasdaq all pushing higher as optimism grows. These big during the S&P right now up 64, 65, 93, up by 1%. We got Dow on 426, maybe 9/10%. Nasdaq pushing higher on minus 1.5%. Nike after earnings down. The VIX below the 10-year 4.29%. Gold right now 47.7 for the ounce up 2.3%. And West Texas, then we get crude oil 99.34 a barrel, down about just about 3%. 101.58 down 3%. Self-driving car. Suddenly it grinds to a complete stop after a system glitch. You're having in China, specifically Wuhan, a number of financial started public global accounts and suddenly it stopped in the streets. Tracking passengers and vehicles. It's a concern about the safety of the liability of technology guy, Charlie Allen, stolen the phone. So the purpose is fine.
That reminds me of power outage in San Francisco last year, when the windows San Francisco just suddenly stopped because they didn't know what to do.
With little right and south, all the way to some new stuff. I'm out there. Story on this Elon Musk SpaceX now. Used to have all traction outside commercial city buildings actually did more of these things. You got all the big banks like that. I'll be the guys who gave this this so you expect nothing less than you guys have yes. Let's get back to these markets here. We've got this Charlie's supporting boom goes higher today on good volume, by the way. Chief Executive Officer, Chief Investment Officer, Finance, yes, here. So it seems to be, the market seems to be past. For
¿Qué? ¿Qué? ¿Qué pero?
So, future the market will really depend on what happens. Maybe if we have certainty now, right? What some sort of ceasefire, we want to get straight before the opens and that all of the world's gas energy still demands will be met within a period of time. And, the longer delay of this being held out won't lead to ideas, which are things like inflation, inflation rise, inflation market, I should say, things like inflation rising and stocks continuing to fall off those. So I think it depends, right? It's a good sign. It's nice to see the value, but we need to sustain good news that we're coming to work into. Maybe we'll get some indication of what's to come. The president giving an address this evening at 9 p.m. Although in the past, so state of the union that took almost 2 hours and didn't mention a lot at all. And then the following couple of days, we had the war on Iran again. So it's hard to say. So one thing that we check out is that Elon Musk's SpaceX reported to file confidentially for an IPO. This is something that the market has been anticipating for a long time. And I imagine that there are a lot of investors out there who want to get a piece of this company. Likely the position for that, how did you think investors to see some of that position to place? I think that the long-term positioning is about in the space for the last year or two. We got one is about buying now. This is like the most confidential IPO buying in history, I think, but which is great, right? I mean, it goes to kudos to Elon Musk for his presentation and technology that he brings to the markets, whether it's like Tesla, whether it's with XAI, and whether it's with SpaceX. And so I think that there's going to be massive demand for the equity itself. And I think that investors will do a lot of things with it first outright. Probably try to get those IPO allocations unlucky enough to do so. And then I think the rest of us will probably look to things like ETFs
once it starts listing, once it's publicly traded, I think I start seeing that mean different products that are relevant to space, relevant to technology. You know, you being very sort of information about NASDAQ, doing that clearly, additional cause, you know, I think you're gonna see it everywhere. And investors would be happy to have this business too.
Hey, so the other thing, at the buyer ETFs, your platform, it's 5 weeks or so was volatility in the market. What you've seen in terms of fund flows, and your investors are putting money into the market, taking it out of stocks, maybe put it in terms of the fund flows.
Yeah, I mean, it's been super interesting on our side.
¿Quién me rompió?
Too, but the interesting thing is that there's just so much money on the sidelines, right? And this is what we talk about, like the way that next big pullback and that 5% is one pullback, which doesn't feel so big. It kind of feels big in recent times to get back into the market. You know, you have stuff like a big cheap 50 offices like this. You know, still like Black Friday sales and opportunistic action stocks, but it hasn't really happened over the last week or so. And I think it's because the issue is just too big and the uncertainty is too big. And it's because it's geopolitical, it's abroad, and there's uncertainty there. But if you take that out of the equation and the debt certainty there, I do think you'll start seeing, you know, money back into the markets. And I think you'll go where it was going before the pullback. It's going to be these, you know, absolute beat up AI meetings and funding, including AI infrastructure. But, you know, answering your question a little bit more specifically with the finance, we've seen the flows into generators and modern work and ETF, right? So investors, and those single stocks have seen flows too, right? So investors are looking at things like tools being down, you know, intelligence systems, things like this, just the future of modern warfare, the idea that 2000 drones instead of one giant missile, the power of information decision making, and, you know, flows are definitely on there. Performance will take time, but again, and we haven't lost those days. I think some investors are saying, look, they're selling at 7 and they're not returning cash.
All right, Sylvia Brzezinski, a CIO of Defiance ETFs. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on the markets. We just have a red headline that once again, lost the diet. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly because all these pharmaceutical names are difficult to pronounce. It gets US approval. So once again, these weight loss until now it's been all injectables. The diet has gotten US approval and that will open up.
People don't get injections. And I think this should be a given. To take it close, solve that.
Here's and look at some other companies that are on the move and attention to RH restoration hardware.
10:10:30.
Just this morning.
Regresando.
Consumer Parlance senior analyst in the intelligence, and she joins us now. So this is very much a play on the consumer and a higher end consumer as well. Let's see what do you know about RH and how it is given.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, so our US goes on top and the bottom line when we look at fourth quarter earnings, but I think worse is when we look at this year, the outlook is well below expectations, assuming consumer sales decline in the first quarter. And probably between this and then the fourth quarter, demand is really strong. They're really going to count on this spike in the back half of the year with the new election coming, sort of on that growth thing.
Yeah, much of this, talk to you about what questions I always have. This is through line versus specific here.
Yeah, so not always, I do think that it is a company specific story. Back at last year, did we grow sales 8%? That's pretty impressive in the environment that we were playing in, that is above the year average, but we do play for a very rich customer and they are striving to be a luxury brand. And they're really make waves in that space. You know, these cost a lot of money, they're investing very heavily, they're opening galleries all over the globe. And I think that there was just a lot of disappointment because this coming year that growth like slowed down. And they're longer term to get well out of it.
And I'm just looking at Wayfair. Those stocks are nicely lower. Even now in interiors, nicely higher. So I'm not sure there's much of a read-through to some other furniture companies that are out there. Let's see how much are tariffs the story for RH.
The tariffs have
latest piece here, they crossed about 190 basis points in margin in the fourth quarter. Their guidance is kind of including a similar thing for this coming year. The bigger thing for this year, as I mentioned, is that tremendous investment going into the business. They're expecting erosion in their margin again this year. The past year or so, and we're looking at another year of heavy investment from the margin, even if we just see some of that parent cost come down. But it's definitely a factor. They've also talked about, significantly doing their sourcing around, which is part of the slowdown in that first quarter, reworking that, and they might have a little bit of less product to sell until we get later into the year.
Nancy, what do you do with e-commerce? How can I so not to sort of see it,
Yes, so e-commerce is a very small piece of their business, and the openings that they're looking at doing, in Paris and Milan, they are really leaning into experiential, and wanting people to come see their product in person, feel it, and really understand the quality. So they are leaning into expansion. We actually see them here where we Sonoma is so expanding stores for the first time in almost 10 years. So we're seeing some of these bigger furniture companies, even though they are focused on growing that online presence, they would really want more their customers to come into the store and see the product, and they're willing to invest to do that.
Lindsay Duck, Consumer Hardline Senior Analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence, giving us a read through on RH Restoration Hardware, down 24% in today's trading. I love that question because it goes to the idea that all these digital native companies, at the end of the day, it comes full circle. Still want to see, touch, and feel whether it's going to do online.
Yeah, we've heard from some retail folks, was saying that for the youngsters, kids, they don't come back to the mall again. It's coming full circle, So
And the parents are like, sure, I'll take you so long.
exactly. So if you're there's any level of malls doing great.
Yeah.
Because it needs to go outside.
You just have to, make sure that it's Instagrammable and you have some stuff out there for the kids to take pictures with. We've got a lot more coming up on Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to check in with Anthony Hughes, our U.S. capital markets reporter on SpaceX filing for an IPO. That's next.
Qué feo el mercado hoy. Se quedó en acumulación. Yo sigo creyendo que esto va a ir para arriba. Mande. ¿Qué?
Decirle que me ayude también. Donde Don Shaggy se dañó y ya no tengo sacar.
Vamos, si llega al precio, yo sigo creyendo que va para arriba esto. Así que nos vemos mañana. Ahí vemos si se dio o no se dio la entrada. Chau, chau.